Hey everybody, how are y'all doing? I think my audio is working all right, but let me know if you can't hear me. Welcome to another weekly live stream. Really great to have all you here. Let's kick things off by doing a review of what happened this week, and then we'll do any Q&A. In fact, if you have any questions for me, feel free to ask me in the chat as we go. And then we'll try to pick up on the live coding we were doing last week. I don't know if I got through all the bugs that jammed us up, but I know we got through some of them. So hopefully we'll be able to finish the RSS reader application that we were working on. So yeah, great to see you. Let's get started. Atek twins, yeah. So all right, our weekly update. As I have said in the past, we're going to do this every week. I'm just going to give an overview of everything that has happened in the past week. This is in part just to, keep everybody on top of things, but also Atek is a open source project, and we're extremely open to contributions. So I like to do these sorts of things to help anybody that might be interested in contributing kind of get their feet under them and figure out what's going on so that they could potentially contribute code or designs. And if you want to do that, join the Discord, hit me up, and we'll get you plugged into the process. So here is the headlines for what happened on this past week. First of all, Atek now auto-updates itself. Realize that that's probably a pretty important thing to do early on because I am pushing out a whole lot of bug fixes and new features, and people just don't remember to run an update manually. So now whenever you start up Atek, if you install it as a global NPM module, it will find updates and automatically update and restart itself. We'll probably want to make that configurable at some point, but for now it's just going to go ahead and automatically update. This is all in developer preview. It is all highly unstable, so you may run into some bugs, file an issue, hit me up in the Discord, we'll figure it out. You may end up having to nuke your data directory a couple times. That is going to happen. But for the most part, everything's working. So, auto-updating, got that going. And then what I spent actually a lot of the week working on is getting users and authentication implemented. So now whenever you jump onto Atek, you'll actually get this login screen. First time that you run Atek, it'll send you through a flow to create your main user. So I'll go ahead and log in here, and that'll dump us into the Atek home screen. So there is that action. Now, there was a whole lot that had to go on behind the scenes for that, and so let's get into the technical updates. For the actual users, of course, we were introducing the data records and the APIs around it, so there's a big update with that. Now, applications have two headers that are sent to them on any request that they get. One of them is the Atek auth user, and the other is the Atek auth service. One of the things that's nice about the design of Atek is that all the requests sent to your application are actually proxied through the host environment, which means that you don't have to handle login or authentication or anything like that. That happens automatically. So if I go over to my Hello World application, it will just go ahead and send that authentication information through those headers to the application, and so you don't have to worry about login. In fact, the way it is designed is if I now log out and then try to go to that application, hello world no.localhost, it'll take me right back to the login. So all of the apps are protected behind this authentication, so you don't have to worry about people that aren't logged in using the application. Makes it a lot easier compared to having to do all of that user identity and login and stuff like that yourself. So it's a nice convenience to how all that works. So yeah, the Atek auth user gives you the key of the user that's logged in. Atek auth service will be set if another application is communicating with your application. So those headers are now handled for you, login is handled for you, etc. So that is all nice and handy. An interesting aspect of how all this works is that applications are actually installed by individual users, which means that every application is owned by some user. If my Hello World application decided to talk to some other application because I installed it, it would identify as coming from me. So the headers would have Atek auth service being the ID of the service, but then the Atek auth user would be my user since I'm the one that owns that application. That is true for most applications. There are some multi-user applications, which this is getting a little more into the weeds of things, but things like the database system, the hypercorporate daemon, they actually run as multi-user applications, but most of them will be single user. Which, again, makes things kind of easy as an application developer. You really don't have to think too hard about how you're building your application. one of the things that actually happened as a consequence of that is that your home application, which is this guy right here, is actually chosen by each individual user. So you can install as a as a user on the thing. If somebody else is sharing an Atek server with you, you could still choose what your home interface looks like. It's kind of similar to being able to change your desktop environment in Linux. So that's just another application. In fact, it's Lone Star is the name of the default one. Okay, so that is that. And then probably the only other thing really worth mentioning is that we changed how applications listen to the network now. Previously, you were given an assigned port and you would listen to the assigned port. I changed that to use socket files instead so that we're not polluting all of the port namespace with a bunch of random applications. So now you actually are going to be using the assigned socket file to listen to, which is a Unix style socket. Basically, it's very straightforward as a developer to use. Why don't I show real quick? Here's what that looks like. So you just grab that environment variable process.env.atek assigned socket file, and you just listen on that socket, and that's that. There's a bug in Windows. I still need to get it fixed for Windows, but it works fine on Mac OS and Linux. And so that is how that works. So if anybody has any questions about any of that, feel free to ask, but that is what I was working on this week. So it was a lot of, not the most exciting aspect of work, a lot of features that are important to have, necessary infrastructure inside of the Atek core, but not the most exciting stuff. So hopefully next week we'll get into some more interesting things. I haven't quite decided yet what that'll be, but now we got that out of the way. So does anybody have any questions for me before we continue on, or if not, or kind of not too many people watching today, so I may actually end up calling it an easy day. It sort of depends on how many folks stick around and want to do the live coding, but if not, I could use a half day for sure. So does anybody have any questions for me? And if we don't have a couple more folks show up, then I'm just going to say that's that for today. Well, why don't I just go ahead and do a little bit of coding. Since I'm here, went to the trouble, who wants to just end it at 10 minutes. So let's just jump into the RSS reader application here. And let's see if we can get this thing working. So I have some dependencies I'm going to need to update. So node RPC is now there, and the ADB API, I believe we moved up to, there we have 1.1. Okay. So I'm going to start by updating those guys. All right, let me zoom in my editor. So real quick review of how the application works. It is a very simple Node.js application. It sets up an Express app, hosts its front end using Express, so that's the static folder over here. And then it exports a RPC API, which we have defined here. So you have a couple of functions here for adding an RSS source, removing an RSS source, listing your current RSS sources, and listing the feed. The only other thing that we managed to get to is the actual database. So here we have the application is getting or creating the main DB, and we actually don't need any of that action there. So you grab the database, and we're using an alias here to reference it, so main DB. And then right around, just whenever we use them, we have a couple of tables that we are adding onto the database. So we have the subscription right here, and that shouldn't be feed item, that should be subscription. So that's our subscriptions table. And then we have the feed item. And so this is our data model right here that gets put into the database. So why don't we go ahead and install this application. work. Atek RSS reader. Now let's see if that runs successfully. Did not, because I need to update this code here. Okay, Atek restart RSS reader. Okay, so it's running correctly. So I'm going to head over here, and there's my RSS reader, and open it up. And that worked correctly. Let's see if we are fortunate enough to actually have the database show up in there. And indeed it does. Now, we don't have the tables created yet because we haven't accessed them yet. We could actually go ahead and preemptively install, quote-unquote, those tables onto the database. Why don't we do that? So we're going to take the subscriptions. Normally what you're going to do is just start using a table against a database like this. So whenever you define a table, you define the schema using the define table method from the API. And then you just pass in the database into the table and run methods against it. It's kind of an interesting model. You sort of run your tables against a database, so to speak. So we have a subscriptions table here, and you pass in the database, and then you say create the subscription record. Same with the feed items. If you ever want to sort of preemptively register those tables, you can. All that requires is just running this call here, and it will do that in the background. And so let's build and restart it. Okay. And there they are. They are registered onto the database. You're not going to have any records in them yet, of course, but they are working. So let's go ahead and get a front end going, so that we can actually, why don't we just test it by calling against it? So API dot add source and hacker use RSS front page. All right, fingers crossed that this works. Okay, so that should have, let's see what our code does there. So it gets the feed, creates the subscription, adds the latest feed items. So now if we look inside of the subscription, there it is. But it looks like we do have a bug that is stopping that from loading up because we use URLs as the key, and I recall being a little bit unsure if that was a good idea, and indeed it was not. So we'll have to dig into that in a little bit. Let's see the feed items. Feed items worked as well. Cool. All right. Nice to have that work. So let's take a look at the subscription data model choice here. Yeah, I recall being conflicted about using the URL as the key at the time, and was not ready to recall. It would probably work, but what's happening here is that this thing is just getting confused for good reason. So why don't we see if delete source works? Didn't. Interesting. Yeah, but it did do that. All right, let's take a look here. So first of all, let's not delete the subscription until the feed items are correctly deleted, and then that should be dot records, not by that field. So let's add a new method. Delete all. And just save ourselves a little bit of pain by doing this. Okay, cleared those boys out. Now let's update our data model. We're going to change that key. And you know what I'm thinking is that we'll just use an automatically generated key rather than any of the record values. And as a consequence of that, whenever we want to look up a subscription, we're just going to have to search for it. Now let's also update the feed items to have subscription key. And that way, we basically, it's akin to having a a foreign key on your data model. And so then whenever we create a subscription, let's sub-record equals that, and then we will do subscription key, sub-record.key. Okay, so far so good. When we remove a source, we need to look up the subscription first. So it's something that has come up in the past. We don't yet have secondary indexes on Atek database, so we're just going to have to do a manual scan and find. Not my favorite, but I'll put with it. Find sub. I could do that, but then I also need to have the application restart automatically, and I don't have a facility for that, so it just wouldn't really be worth it. But I appreciate the suggestion. Okay, that's all good. Of course, I could set up probably find a way to trigger the restart from the watcher, but just not gonna bother. All right, let's try re-adding that source. All right, interesting. Oh, I know why that didn't work. All right, interesting. I need to increase the revision. Hopefully I've implemented all that correctly. This all is moving so quickly that I'm literally implementing features like right before I do this live code, so this is partly me testing all this out for the first time. So, you know, some things work, some things do not. Okay, there we go. So what just happened there was that I made a data model change, and anytime you do that, the Atek database needs to know that a change occurred, and so you just increase the revision. Now, you're normally only supposed to do non-breaking changes for that. It's kind of complicated. I'm still working around the tooling for that. It would have been good if I had a way to force that update while I'm doing development, but anyway. Not gonna worry about that. All right, so we're in business now. You can actually see the feed record. So this is the database right here, where you get a nice sort of automatically created admin screen for all this. You can see the actual records in the database. You get a nice description of what each of them represents. So now let's actually take a look at the API output, API.listFeed. Not list feed, maybe it's list all feed. What do I call that? List all feed. Okay, same bug as before. I need to do .records. Okay, so there is all the records. So that's looking good, so let's go ahead and render. And so really there's just two tests we're going to have. We need to just render the feeds as they show up, and then add a little input to add new feeds, and that'll be our application. So let's create an index.js. Hey, guy, good to see you. Alright, so I'm going to use HTML elements. So I'm going to do feed element extends HTML element. Kitty's doing great, sleeping right over there. Okay, so we've created our feed element, and so we're going to do feed items equals await API dot list all feed, and then we're just going to dump that into the HTML of this element. Normally I use a framework called lit element for creating custom web components like this, but whenever I'm just working quickly, I prefer just doing good old raw JavaScript. Raw quote-unquote JavaScript. Alright, if item dot value dot don't know yet. So I'm going to just dump the content, and I'm also going to put this into the console so I can see what I'm doing. Alright, so we're going to want to stick in the link, the creator, and the title. Start with the href. Now, if I was doing this really right, I would escape this. In fact, I probably ought to go ahead and do that. But I can't be putting out code that potentially be a security vulnerability. Okay. So there are the links. And there's just a couple more things. We want to say what the publication date was, and the creator and the feed. So let's do that. Alright. So, three things next. First is that we want to style this. Second is that we want to escape the HTML that we're putting in, because it's untrusted content. And third, we want to get those dates formatted a little more nicely. So let's start with some styling. monospace on this. Okay, and let's just modify the links so that text underline none text decoration. And then we'll show the underline on hover. Just to clean up the visuals a little bit. All right, and then let's get the date formatting better. There's a new date formatter that is quite handy, intl.datetime format. So we'll construct that formatter and take some of these suggested parameters. And that failed. F is not a function because it's f.format. Okay, so that's a little nicer. Certainly ain't a beautiful interface, but it'll do the job. Now let's get our escaping in. Ourselves trying to run that by hand. Okay, so that is that. Leaves just one more task, and that is to add a input to add a new feed. Query selector input add. So we'll listen to the submit event, the default. Wait, API.add source e.current.target.value.url window.location. Button type equals submit. Add feed. Right. Okay, and then we'll style that. App add feed form display block margin 1 rem. Actually, we'll do display flex width 100%, max width 300 pixels. Line items center. Okay. Okay, now we just need one more RSS feed to test out. Let's see if there's an RSS feed for like Stack Overflow. But they have a blog. There it is. Work to find. And RSS. Okay. Can't read properties of undefined. Interesting. Good call. I'll do that. Type URL. Ah. Okay. So then, there was that, and we see any, yep, there it is. So there we have it. Simple RSS reader. So once again, I'll just step through the code so everybody can see how all that works, and then I'll upload this thing into our example apps here in a second. So the first thing that's worth mentioning is that applications usually are single user in Atek. They can be installed for multiple users, but by and large they're only a single user, which means that you do not have to worry about doing any kind of login or anything like that. That is handled for you. So you are going to have your regular Node.js application. In this case, I installed two Atek modules here. One of them is the Atek database API. The other one is the Atek RPC layer. In our index on the back end, we create our database, and we load in our two tables that we authored here. The table definitions look like this. You specify a JSON schema, specifying the shape. You specify some templates for helping to describe the database records to the end user, which shows itself up in this interface here. Then you can also do things like specifying what the key of the record should be. We're not using that at the moment. So yes, so we register our two tables onto our database. And then we export an RPC API, which includes the methods add source, remove source, list sources, list the feed, delete all. And it's all pretty straightforward. Whenever you add a source, it's going to get the feed. It's going to use the subscription tables on our database to create a record for the feed that we fetched there. And it's going to go through the RSS feed and create feed item records for each of those items. So using the feed items table on our database, creating those records. And then whenever we do a list, we just use the feed items table, call list, pull out the records, we sort them, slice them, and return them. Real straightforward. And then we create our HTTP server, we export the RPC API there, host the static there, and that is it. A next step for a project like this would be to have it periodically fetch the latest from the different RSS feeds that are currently subscribed. It's not currently doing that, but actually would be real straightforward. You would factor this code out and just set up an interval running, once every hour or so, or have a button to manually trigger it. These programs run in the background as long as Atek is running, so it's essentially you can set up the equivalent of a cron job that way. And then, on our front end, we just have this very simple application where we use the Atek browser RPC to connect to our backend and send RPC requests to that. And so all of our API calls get put onto the page, as I was showing earlier, and that is that. So yeah, I guess we'll call it a wrap from there. If anybody has any questions, I'll give you all a minute or two to do that, and otherwise, that'll be it for today, and figure out what is next for next week over the weekend. I'm going to go ahead and commit and push. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and put this online. Thanks everybody for joining me today, and I'll see you all in the Discord. See you all on Twitter. Feel free to hit me up and let me know how things are going. All right, have a great rest of your day. Bye, everybody.